Hey everybody, welcome to the video. Let's go over the 10-game MLB DFS slate for today on Draftkings. But before we continue, as always, if you guys could just leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, you might as well hit that subscribe button. I'm here all season long trying to help you guys become better MLB DFS players, and I cover other sports as well, including NASCAR, which I will be doing a NASCAR live stream today at 2 p.m. Eastern, so if you want to come in, check it out. Feel free to do so. So if you're going to keep coming back to the channel each and every single day or each and every single week, you might as well hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new content. You also follow me on social media. I'm at Pennell16 over on Twitter, CPenn16 over on IG. And if you want to support my content over on Patreon, always much appreciated. We got 300 plus people in there, so you can hop into the Discord. And then you just get access to all the content that I put out each and every single day, the extra content, I should say. And I do update it throughout the day as well. So if you're interested, links in the description below. If you're not, hey, that's fine. Let's just dive into today's slate. So not a lot of pitching options I have listed here, but I felt pretty comfortable with this three-man pitching pool here. Now, I think the chalk's going to be Zach Gallen and Sheffield, which I feel pretty comfortable with. I mean, it's also pretty cheap. We have a 9,600 SP1, then a 6,500 SP2. So you can pretty much do whatever you want with bats. Now, if you went the McKenzie Sheffield route, you can do whatever you want with the bats. Although this is not a Coors Field slate, so I wouldn't say it's something I'd really recommend doing. But it's certainly viable if you don't think Gallen's going to hit that 20-plus point ceiling. Because I think McKenzie and Sheffield can both potentially get 10 to 15 points today, which at their price tags are going to be totally fine. But we'll start up top with the SP1 on this slate. It's going to be Zach Gallen, who's had an incredible start to the season. Yeah, if I just read his game log off to you, he's at 14, 23, 17, 21. Then he has best outing of the season last week versus Oakland, or last start I should say, where he had 27 fantasy points, struck out 8. And he's just been really good this season. I mean, the strikeouts have been there, 6, 9, 6, 7, 8. And besides his first start with the walk issues, where he's had 5 walks, which is obviously concerning. After that, though, I mean, 1, 1, 0, and 1. He's given up a homer every single start so far, but I mean, we can live with it. They've just been solo shots or 2-run homers. So I think we're going to be fine with Zach Gallen. Vegas likes him as well. Only 3.7 runs against him, 61% chance for the win, and 6.5 strikeouts. Now, the Giants were a team we could pick on quite a bit last season, but I'll be honest, they have some pretty decent bats these days, so I don't think they're a pushover matchup like they were last year. But I think Zach Gallen should be able to win out in this matchup. If you're looking at his numbers last season, they were still pretty good, and his numbers are somewhat similar this season. His strikeout rate is sitting around 30%, which it was 29% last season. And the walks are down too. He had an 11% walk rate last season, and like I said, besides that first start, we had 5 walks. He's really gotten his control down, so that's another positive to see for Zach Gallen. He also limits the hard contact and doesn't really give up too many homers last season, but I will say he has given up a homer each and every single start this year, which I don't love to see that, but it hasn't killed him yet. On the pitch count, it's been around 95 to 100 pitches pretty much each and every single start. And if you're looking at the matchup versus the Giants so far this season, they have a 21.8% strikeout to righties, 136 team ISO, 298 WOBA, and 91 WRC+. I know some of these numbers are going to pop up red for Zach Gallen, but it's only comparing 3 offenses here, and like each of these offenses aren't. Well, the Texas Rangers and the Detroit Tigers are actually some of the worst offenses in the league currently, so it's going to make these matchups not look good for Gallen, but it's still fine enough. That's not a ton of power, and really just doesn't scare me overall. So I like Zach Gallen SP1 today. Definitely makes sense in cash games. And then Justice Sheffield here at 6,500. I'd imagine he's going to be the popular SP2 on this slate, because the price is nice and the matchup is nice as well. He's had 2 pretty solid outings in a row versus the Rockies on August 9th. He scored 29.1 fantasy points. Oops, sorry, I just got an email. Actually, someone signed up on Patreon, so if you're watching this, thank you, Josh. I do appreciate that. And then versus Houston in his last start, he scored 15, struck out 7 and 4, and only has 1 walk the past 2 starts. So I think Sheffield makes quite a bit of sense here, and this is just a really good matchup versus the Rangers. Now, the Rangers have been actually worse versus righties this season, but they still have not been that great versus lefties, and overall, their offense has been pretty rough. If you're looking at their splits versus lefties, on your 25% K rate, 160 ISO, 299 WOBA, 80 WRC+. So I like the matchup here for Sheffield, and Vegas likes him as well. Only 3.87 runs against him, 57% chance for the win, and 5 strikeouts. And if you guys can hear a bird chirping, I do apologize. I am right beside a window, and I don't know, it must be hungry. This is early in the morning, so could be hungry. But either way, I'd like Sheffield here at 6,500. I think he makes an excellent SP2 option. And if you want to pivot off of Sheffield here, we have Tristan McKenzie at 5,400. The Indians prospect is making his first major league start, which can always be a bit concerning. But the matchup versus the Tigers is what's going to draw me in here. Now, I will say I'm not sure what the pitch count's going to be because he's actually missed all of 2018 and 2019 with a forearm and back strain issues. So we will see, but he's the cheapest pitcher on DK today, and he's got the best matchup you can ask for. Righties have absolutely crushed Detroit this season. Now, I know Adam Plutko got absolutely slaughtered last night, which he was looking okay for a few innings, and I believe it was the fourth or fifth inning where the Indians were up 5-0, I believe, and then the next thing I knew it was 7-5 because I was out at dinner, and then the game was on TV, and I just I saw the Tigers had 7 all of a sudden. I'm like, oh my goodness, Plutko, but I mean, that's the thing with Plutko. He's not very good. But McKenzie, he certainly has upside. He's been regarded as a top prospect in the farm system here in Cleveland. And if we're looking at the splits for the Tigers versus righties this season, they're striking out at nearly a 30% clip, 170 ISO, which is a little up there, but it's nothing to scare me away from. 281 opposing WOBA and a 75 WRC plus. So I like the matchup here for McKenzie. He's the cheapest pitcher on this slate. So if you want to roll out with him in tournaments, I think he's a fine option. Now, if you want to go the Sheffield McKenzie route, you can play pretty much whatever single bat you want on this slate. I'm not really recommending that because I think Zach Gallen's probably someone you're going to want in there because he's got that 20, 30-point upside. Meanwhile, these guys, well, I guess Sheffield technically does have about 30-point ceiling because he did score nearly 30 in his one start versus the Rockies recently. So the potential's there, but these are pretty much the three pitchers that I'm looking at on today's slate. But I think in cash games, you're going to have to end up getting up to Gallen just because you're going to spend a little bit up at pitcher. But that's pretty much it for pitching. It's a nice tight player pool there for me. Then we'll move on to the bats and start with catcher. Just some spend down options here. If you got the money for a spend up guy like JT Realmuto versus a lefty, I have no issues with that. But we'll start with Alex Avila here, 3,300 going up against Brady Singer. And the Twins look like one of the top stacks on the slate. They have an implied team total of 5.35, which I believe is the highest currently, only with a couple of other teams. I actually think they're tied with the Indians right now, but we also have a couple of games out like the Cubs, and the wind is blowing out in Wrigley, so obviously that's going to be a factor as well. I could see the Cubs having potentially the highest team total on the slate, but overall, I do like the Twin stack on today's slate. I like Avila versus righties, and if you're looking at his splits, he's got some decent pop versus them at 227 ISO, 101 WRC plus on the batting average is low, and he strikes out a ton. But he does have a 20% walk rate, and I like all the Twins lefties here versus the Royals. Austin Barnes at 3,000. They're facing off versus a lefty. Now, I prefer the Dodgers versus right-handed pitching, but usually the righties in this lineup are pretty cheap, so they always make decent value options when they're facing a lefty. And Kyle Freeland, while he hasn't been terrible this season, he's still someone we can use righties against, and I like Barnes here. I mean, his numbers versus lefties aren't great, but he's been okay this season, and he's only 3,000, so he makes sense as a punt catcher option versus Kyle Freeland. If you're looking at his splits, he's pretty solid versus lefties. A 23% K rate, 155 ISO, but to righties, and your double-digit walk rate, 15% K rate, and a 284 ISO. So I like the righties here for the Dodgers, and they're all pretty cheap for the most part. You can use the lefties too because a lot of these lefties still hit left-handed pitching well, like Muncy and Cody Bellinger, but for the most part, I will prefer the righties. Then Victor Caratini at 3,000. So right now, the wind is supposed to be blowing out in Wrigley. I think it's going out to center to left around there. So I guess technically that would favor the right-handed bats, but I do like the lefties here for the Cubs going up against Lopez because Lopez does struggle with left-handed bats. But I pretty much think you can load up on the Cubs here as long as the wind is blowing out. I mean, even if the wind isn't blowing out, you can still use these lefties here, but the wind is indeed blowing out. I could see the Cubs having a team total of nearly 6 on this slate, maybe more, but that's still pending. But as of right now, it looks like it is blowing out. And if you guys don't know how Wrigley works, when the wind blows out, it's a huge boost to bats. When it's blowing in, it's a pretty big boost to pitching. That ball will carry, so some outfield flyouts can definitely turn into home runs easily. So don't mind Caratini here. I mean, if you're looking at his splits versus righties, 186 ISO, 107 WRC plus, 270 batting average. Better splits than they are versus left-handed pitching, so I think he's a fine option. And if you're looking at Lopez's splits, I mean, he gives up power to both sides of the plate, but I do prefer lefties against him. An 11% walk rate, less than a 20% K rate, over a 200 ISO and a 360 WOBA. So lefties are certainly playable here. And speaking of lefties on the Cubs, we have Anthony Rizzo at 4,900. I just went over why we want to target lefties against him, so I'm not going to keep repeating that, but I mean, Rizzo's a great hitter versus right-handed pitching, a 150 WRC plus, 307 batting average, 240 ISO. Yeah, if you get the money for him, he definitely makes sense on this slate. Mitch Moreland, someone I love using against right-handed pitching. Now, Alex Cobb, he has not been a gas can this season, so I'll give him a little bit of respect there. And surprisingly, Boston has a team total of under 5 currently, which I could see that rising throughout the day. But I do like the lefties here on Boston. You can use the righties as well, but if you're just targeting one-offs or like a little mini stack, I would prefer the lefties here like Devers, Verdugo, and Mitch Moreland. And Mitch Moreland has been great versus right-handed pitching this season and last season. If you're looking at his splits versus righties, he's got 287 ISO, 125 WRC plus, 550 slugging, and just overall very good numbers. He's been pretty good so far this season. So hitting in the middle of the order for Boston versus a righty and Alex Cobb, I will definitely have some interest there. They're also in Canton Yards, which is a great park for hitting, and you get the guaranteed ninth inning at bats as well, and then you can pick on the Orioles bullpen too. So like Mitch Moreland, even though he's a little expensive at 4,800. Then Carlos Santana, 4,400. So I prefer this Indians team versus right-handed pitching, but Matthew Boyd has not been very good this season. Now, I mean, last year, he was pretty good. He had around 30% K rate, and he had some really decent outings. But this season, he has just not been that great. He's giving up quite a bit of runs pretty much each and every single start, and he just isn't that terrifying of a pitcher to face, really. So I think you can load up on some Indians here. They have one of the higher team totals on the slate at 5.35. Santana's been swinging a hot bat recently, only 4,400, going to be hitting cleanup. Even though he's not a big power hitter, he tends to get on base quite a bit, even though he's got a low batting average for the most part. But versus lefties, he did have a 324 batting average last season and only 15% K rate, and he also walks a ton. That's the thing with Santana. He usually tends to get on base. He's got a 428 on base percentage versus lefties, and I think he's a fine option here if you're stacking up the Indians versus Matthew Boyd and the Detroit bullpen. Then if you need a complete value option, which I don't have too many just pump plays on listed here because I think if we're going with the pitchers I have here that are pretty cheap, and McKenzie and Sheffield, you don't really have to punt too much. It's not like we're playing Buehler and Nola in the same lineups today. We got plenty of salary relief, so I don't really think we're going to have to dig this deep. But Kevin Cron versus a lefty and Tyler Anderson, I think it's fine. You get the cheap righty on lefty matchup here. And if you're looking at splits versus lefties last season, he had some pop with a 222 ISO. He's better versus righties, actually, but it's just a cheap value option if you happen to need it. If for some reason you're double spending up a pitcher today, which I don't think you really need to do, but if you are, I don't mind Crown at 2,300. Dropping out second base, it's not my favorite position today. You can look at Max Muncy as well. He's like 51 or 5,200, I believe. He's a fine option, but in cash I wouldn't be playing Muncy for the most part. But I like Cesar Hernandez here at 4,700. He's a bit expensive, but he's a high contact hitter, and I like all of Cleveland here, so it makes sense. It wouldn't make sense to not have their leadoff guy here. If you're looking at splits versus lefties last season, it wasn't great. Only a .07 ISO, 277 WOBA, 67 WRC plus, 263 batting average. But he's a high contact hitter with 11% K rate, and he's fine. He'll see a righty at some point, and I don't mind him. He's leading off for one of the top stacks on the slate, in my opinion. Then we have Marwin Gonzalez at 4,000 going up against the Royals. I like the Twins quite a bit on this slate. They have an implied team total of 5.35, which is tied for the Indians with the Indians currently. And I like all the lefties here. You can use the righties as well. Nelson Cruz is certainly playable. Miguel Sano. But for the most part, I'm going to be targeting lefties. And Marwin Gonzalez is fine. He's actually a better hitter versus left-handed pitching, but he's just cheap enough where he's interesting, especially if you're stacking up the Twins. So don't mind Marwin. And Kike Hernandez, 3,800. You get the cheap righty on lefty matchup. I always like using Kike versus lefties. Now, I will say his numbers last season were actually had a little bit more pop versus righties than he did versus lefties, but overall, I think he's going to be okay here. I like the price tag at 3,800. Wish he was a little bit cheaper because I don't love paying nearly 4K for Kike. When he's in the low 3K range, I like it a bit more because he hits near the bottom of the order, but he's still an okay option. Then drop it down to third base, which is pretty much going to be a spend-up position for me. Unless I go with Kyle Seager at 3,300, but tends to be the heavy hitters at third base. But Jose Ramirez, 5,400. I think he's a fine option here. I prefer him versus right-handed pitching, but he's still got solid numbers versus lefties. Only an 8% K rate. Although I did play Ramirez last night, and he struck out 3 times, which I hate playing guys that are super expensive and they never typically strike out. And then you play them the one night and they strike out 3 to 4 times. It's like, of course. But I don't mind going back to J-Ram here. I think the Indians are a pretty solid stack on this slate versus Matthew Boyd, who's really not shown much upside so far this season. Rafael Devers, I think he's one of the top plays on the entire slate. 5,300. He is great versus right-handed pitching. And I like the lefties here on Boston. I think they make an excellent mini stack today. I don't think you have to full stack Boston, but I think you can mini stack these lefties and Devers, Mitch Moreland, and Alex Verdugo. And if you're looking at Devers splits versus righties, great numbers. You guys get the idea. Dark green bars here, elite numbers. And then Cobb. Sample size wasn't as huge last season, so I can't really use this, but he's actually been okay this year, but I still like the lefties here on Boston. Then Justin Turner, 5,000, a little expensive here, but he gets that righty on lefty matchup, and Justin Turner is really good versus left-handed pitching. 40% fly ball rate, 5581 slugging, 142 WRC plus, near 300 ISO. And like I said earlier, I prefer the righties versus Kyle Freeland, so I like Justin Turner. And if you're going cheap, I don't mind Kyle Seager here at 3,300 go up against Jordan Lyles, who's just been pretty much absolute trash so far to start the season. They only have a 4.63 implied team total, but they're all pretty cheap, and Lyles is just not been very good. And if you're looking at Seager splits versus right-handed pitching last season, it was actually worse compared to the lefties. Last season versus lefties, he had a 300 ISO, and he had a 194 ISO to righties, but I still like him here, and he's actually been not too bad so far to start the season. Jordan Lyles is a guy we can certainly use lefties against. I think J.P. Crawford is also interesting. I don't have him listed here, but I think you can use some of these lefties on the Mariners. You can also use some of the righties as well, but I prefer the lefties because last season Lyles had some pretty tough splits versus righties, but versus lefties, double-digit walk rate, 277 ISO, and I certainly like some of the lefties here. And Jordan Lyles has not been great at all to start this season, so pretty much think a Mariners stack would be playable tonight in tournaments. And then going down to shortstop, we have some heavy hitters once again in Frankie Lindor and Xander Bogaerts. Lindor, again, I prefer most of these guys versus right-handed pitching compared to lefties, but I do think an Indian stack is interesting today, and Matthew Boyd's just not been someone I am too worried about. So I do like Francisco Lindor. Xander Bogaerts at 5,200. Prefer him versus lefties, but he's still got some decent splits versus righties too. A 145 WRC plus, 316 batting average, 241 ISO. Really elite numbers here, and I'm not too scared of Alex Cobb. Again, I know he's not been terrible this season, but Bogaerts, I'll give the advantage to Bogaerts over Alex Cobb, and I do think the Red Sox stack is certainly interesting on this slate, and I think their team total will rise as the day goes on as well. Then Jorge Polanco, 4,500. I mentioned I like the Twins quite a bit here, and I prefer Polanco versus right-handed pitching. His splits last season were just much worse to lefties than they are compared to righties. 133 WRC plus compared to an 88, and just overall much better numbers. Only a 14% K rate, 306 batting average, and just really overall solid numbers over a 200 ISO. So I like Jorge Polanco quite a bit, and he also checks in as pretty affordable as well at 4,500. Chris Taylor, if you want the punt option here, I think he's going to end up being popular because people like playing these cheap Dodger righties, which I do too. I pretty much do it every single time they face a lefty. That's obviously not someone like, I was going to say Clayton Kershaw, but Clayton Kershaw's on the Dodgers, so that would make sense. So a good lefty, Chris Sale, but even Chris Sale's hurt this season. But anyway, Chris Taylor, he's got some decent pop versus lefties with the 262 ISO and just overall some really solid numbers. So I like Chris Taylor. Mookie Betts, 6,200, super expensive, but projection-wise, he'll probably end up looking like one of the better plays on the entire slate, and we're going to be going pretty cheap a pitcher today, so it shouldn't be too hard to fit him in. 6,200, he's really expensive, but it shouldn't be too bad. And last season, he actually had better numbers versus righties, but Mookie Betts versus Kyle Freeland, I'll take Mookie Betts 10 out of 10 times for the most part. He's got elite numbers. He's one of the best players in baseball. He's been hot to start the year, so I like Mookie for sure. JD Martinez, only if you're full stacking Boston, because I really don't like the price tag, and I like him much better versus lefties. We all know that JD Martinez is pretty much the best lefty masher in the league. He went deep last night. Versus righties, he's still good, but the numbers aren't as elite, so only in full Boston stacks because of the price tag. Sorry to pause really quick, but going down to Max Kepler. You guys know I love Max Kepler, and I like the Twins a lot on this slate, and I love Max Kepler versus right-handed pitching, so he's going to be one of the better plays on this slate for me. I think he makes an elite option here. And Eddie Rosario is only 3,900 today, so I love the value we're getting on Rosario. But if I had to pick between the two, I'll take Kepler projection-wise, but Eddie Rosario is going to grade out more than likely as a better value than Kepler. They're pretty similar plays. They have similar skill sets, and you can get Rosario at a $700 discount. But I love Max Kepler. He's great versus righties, and don't really think Singer's going to be that great of a play today. Then Alex Verdugo, 4,600. I've mentioned it multiple times, but I do like the lefties here on Boston. I like the lefty mini stack. I did that last time they were facing, who were they facing? Who was the last righty that was on Baltimore? Oh, I can't remember who it was. Either way, Alex Verdugo, Mitch Moreland, Rafael Devers, that's what I did. Now, Verdugo did fine, Devers did fine, but Mitch Moreland got that 9th inning home run at the end of the game. I think it was with 1 or 2 outs left, which is very thankful because I barely cashed that day. It was because Mitch Moreland hit that homer, so I really do appreciate that, Mitch. But I like Verdugo here. He's good versus right-handed pitching, and he's going to be leading off, so I like Verdugo. Franmil Reyes, he has been really hot. He homered last night, and he's just been putting up points each and every single day. And you get the righty and lefty matchup here. He packs a ton of power. He actually had more power versus righties last season, but he's still good versus lefties. A 240 ISO, 126 WRC plus, 280 batting average, 520 slugging. I mean, really good power numbers here, and Reyes is going to be hitting in the middle of the order for one of the better offenses to stack on this slate. So I like Franmil. AJ Pollock, 4,100. I could see him being pretty popular. There's a lot of good mid-range to cheap outfielders today, so I'm not really sure if any of these one guys are going to be absolute chalk, but there's a lot of good options down here, so I don't really think you have to spend up an outfield. But, I mean, you also have Mookie Betts, and we're not going to go too expensive at pitcher today, so we'll see. I might be spending up at shortstop and third base for the most part, but maybe first base as well, so we'll see. But a lot of value here in the outfield. But I like Pollock versus lefties, as always. I've mentioned it multiple times. If you guys watch my videos, I don't think I have to explain why I like Pollock versus lefties. He's got good splits versus them, and Freeland, he will struggle with right-handed bats. Kyle Schwarber, as long as the wind's blowing out, I mean, Schwarber should be one of the best plays on the slate. He's only 4,000, going to be hitting cleanup here, and I have to imagine, I mean, he's going to grade out pretty well. I have to imagine that the implied team total for the Cubs are going to be pretty high as well. I like lefties here versus Lopez, and Schwarber's pretty darn good versus righties. I mean, near 300 ISO, 552 slugging, 127 WRC plus. So I like Schwarber a lot at 4,000. I think he'd be an excellent option. Eddie Rosario kind of already touched on that. He's pretty much the same play as Kepler, but he's also a bit cheaper. Ian Happ, 3,300, going to be leading off here, and look, you get another lefty switch hitter. You get another lefty here versus Lopez. And if you're looking at his splits, he's better versus righties than he is versus lefties. Last season, he had a 318 ISO to right-handed pitching, 381 WOBA, 591 slugging. I mean, elite numbers here. He's only 3,300. I mean, arguably, as long as the wind is blowing out, he's going to be one of the top plays on the entire slate. So I like Ian Happ a lot. Then Jordan Luplow. I think that's how you say his name. I'm an Indians fan, so I should probably know this, but I really never hear his name being called. Luplow, whatever one you prefer. Luplow kind of sounds the funnest. But 3,100, great versus left-handed pitching, looking at his splits. 422 ISO last season. These are pretty similar numbers to JD Martinez. I'm not saying he's as good as JD Martinez, obviously, but really similar numbers here. 198 WRC plus, 742 slugging, 16% walk rate. I mean, I like Luplow here at 3,100 if you need the value. But Happ really looks like a really good play today. And he grades out really well in my projections right now, assuming that the wind is blowing out. So that's pretty much going to be it for the video, guys. I think it's a pretty fun slate because I love slates that I think we can go decently cheap at pitching because we can load up on the bats all we want. So looking forward to it, but I appreciate you guys watching. Check out the NASCAR video if you haven't already. If you want to come and chat it up live at 2 p.m., you can hop in. So that's going to be it, guys. Hope you enjoy your weekend, I guess.